Hello, I'm Mark Duggan, and this is the PI Filmmaker podcast. We're now up to episode 3. I hope that the viewers are enjoying this and that they're getting something out of it. I'm certainly enjoying putting it out into the world. In terms of today's podcast, I do have some notes because I want to stay on track, and I'm very wary of some of the subjects that I'm going to be dealing with and referring to, because as I pointed to in episode 1, I'm currently involved in kind of legal proceedings, let's say, and I don't want to damage that in any way, so I'm going to tread carefully. So if you hear me pausing or looking for notes, that's why. And I'll get a little bit deeper into that in today's episode. But generally, it's kind of been a mixed week in terms of my experiences as a filmmaker. On the one hand, it's been super positive. Yesterday I locked, well, I say locked, I more or less completed the sound design for Notion. That's edging ever closer to completion. Next, I'm going to concentrate on the colour grading, and not this Sunday, Sunday after, we've got some pickup shots for a sequence they're just basically cutaways that we need to capture, and we'll be doing them in a studio. And I've been doing other activities this week, like syncing footsteps, going out recording some additional Foley, and that's now all been placed into the timeline, and it's sounding really good, and I think it's looking really good as well. I mean, not necessarily comparable to Hollywood productions, but this is a micro-budget feature film after all. But then there was kind of a little bit of negativity too. On Sunday, I received a text message from a student of mine that I taught between 2009 and 2012. And that student is now a filmmaker. He works in film and video, and he's called Alex Gilbert. And he let me know he'd watched Blurred Lines, my previous feature. It had really connected with him. He really enjoyed it. It touched him. And this was his review. Give me one moment. So, Alex said, coming from a background in filmmaking, I found this film to be a very raw and personal look into what the process is really like. Unfortunately, it's not all a romantic fantasy of smooth sailing that Hollywood makes it out to be. It's bloody hard work, and sometimes things don't go to plan. This film is a love letter to that, and filmmaking in general. I was transfixed for the 1 hour 43 minute runtime, and by the end I had a deep smile on my face for what was a deeply personal and fascinating story the director wanted to tell. If you're a filmmaker, either budding or established, I implore you to watch this film. It will make you realise how much you love the profession. Now, thank you for that, Alex. I'm really pleased that the film resonated with you. And Alex told me that as a result of watching this film, he's made his own feature film available to the public again. For whatever reason, he'd removed it off various platforms. I don't know why. I don't know what's gone on there. But he decided that, okay, it is what it is. I'm going to put it out into the world, and he's done that. And when you know that, it's great to hear when your film has led someone else to do something creative. That's really just everything. And this film has had a lot of positive feedback from indie filmmakers. Darren Scott is an indie filmmaker based in the Midlands. It really resonated with him. He wrote a really nice review for it. More locally, there's an indie filmmaker called Sam Liddle, who makes personal short films. It really resonated with him. But as I said in episode 1, the response has been mixed to this film. It's had a very mixed response, and I was reminded of that on Sunday. After looking at Alex's review, I noticed that someone else had reviewed it, and he's done this, I think it's a he, I'm not sure. They've done this under their own name, and they've just written, besides giving it a half star, poo. Now, besides just being incredibly immature, that's not criticism as far as I'm concerned. I get trying to have a laugh and trying to make your friends laugh, and being whatever, humorous, if you call that humour. It's immature as far as I'm concerned, and it doesn't help indie filmmakers doing that stuff. It's okay writing that stuff when you're dealing with $1 million films that are going to have dozens and dozens of reviews, but when you're an indie filmmaker and there's less reviews on that page, all you're doing is damaging the public perception of that film. So anyway, because this person has their profile accessible, or at least I can identify who they are, I went and had a look at what this filmmaker had made. And their short film, is available on YouTube. And I was met with a short that had inconsistent lighting, no understanding of matching action between shots, no understanding of the 180-degree rule. Now, that's a rule that some filmmakers can break. Kubrick famously broke the 180-degree rule. Ozu has broken the 180-degree rule. But generally, if you watch like a lot of just TV dramas, for instance, will often keep the camera, when it's shooting a conversation, will often stay on one side of the actors so that we understand between the cuts where they are, the visual geography of that space, that they're looking at each other, so it cuts together in a coherent way and isn't disorientating for the viewer. Now, there's loads of videos out there explaining the 180-degree rule that you can go check out, but this film had no understanding of that. The performances were weak. Thematically, I didn't think it was very interesting. And it just makes me wonder, like, what if you're long term? Oh, as I said, so basically this person is a student filmmaker, and they're a student at the university that I used to work at. So suddenly it all clicks into place that, okay, this person has obviously heard about me through the grapevine and has decided that they're going to just slag my work off on Letterboxd. Fine, but you're going to have something to back that up with, as far as I'm concerned, that confidence. And if I sound like I'm kind of stumbling over my words this week, it's because this is a really kind of difficult situation, quite frankly, because, as I say, there's ongoing legal issues around my previous employment, and it's not related to the reviews. There are other issues that are the reason why I'm going through a tribunal process. So I don't want to get too much into the nature of the film reviews, because that is tied into it somewhat. But this student has decided to write that, and I'm looking at their film and thinking, well, there's so many technical issues, and that's before we get into sort of its creative limitations. Having worked in HE, I know that this film would have probably got graded somewhere in the 50s. Now, films are university marking in general is between 0 and 100. Hardly anyone gets below 40. Everything kind of passes at this point. You've got to do something really, really bad for a film or an essay or whatever to fail, which is kind of an issue in and of itself, because if you're judging this against professional standards, which is what universities are all about, that these are nearing professional quality, then frankly some things probably should fail. But this film has technical issues and creative issues, so I was kind of interested what the general thought would be on social media with my followers. So I ran a short poll and I asked my followers, granted very small sample, how they would grade this film. Very good is 70 to 79. Good is a grade of 60 to 69. Fair is a grade of 50 to 59. Adequate is a grade of 40 to 49. Lower would be a fail, and you'd have to resit. Here's how those results came out. Granted, this was a fairly small sample, so we can't take too much stock in it, but 22% deemed it very good or good. Fair was 17%. Adequate was 17%. And lower than that was 44%. Now, 44% of the people who voted thought that this film should have received a grade lower than 40, which maybe says a lot. I don't know why these people voted like that, but based on who voted, I can illuminate the situation a little bit. So the people who voted high were student voters. Now, these are people who decided to vote probably to back their mate up, or in solidarity, I don't know. But there were student filmmakers on the same course as this person. The lower grades, people who voted below 40, tended to be experienced filmmakers and people who've taught within education, plus other people who've studied film and in the recent past, or within the past sort of 5-10 years. Now, these votes show that there's a clear divide in expectations as far as I'm concerned. It says something about training. It says something about standards. It says something about, possibly it says something about how students think their work should be assessed as filmmakers. But if people who have more experience are viewing this film in ways where they're spotting technical and creative limitations, I think education should be about helping students understand why those people think that. But that's not for me to discuss. What I'm going to discuss is kind of the response around blurred lines, because what happened this week reminded me of what I've been dealing with for kind of almost a year. So as I said in the first episode, the response around blurred lines was very mixed. But there's kind of a caveat to that. The caveat being, the people who deemed this film not very good were primarily students who were studying at the institution where I was teaching. Many of them gave the film 1 or half-star ratings, whilst giving their own films and their mates' films 5 stars. Now, that kind of shows to me what was going on there, that these people were probably not being very honest, because I wouldn't deem any of my work 5 stars. Films like The Godfather, that's a 5-star film. Films like Tokyo Story, that's a 5-star film. Many of these student films were not 5 stars. So anyway, they're giving their own films 5 stars. They're deeming my film half a star. Why did this happen? Well, the reviews, if you go and take a look at them, refer to academic feedback, the fact that some people were not happy with academic feedback, and then they were writing about my teaching publicly. Now, the reason why I'm kind of umming and ahhing and stumbling is because, as I say, there's now a tribunal case going on in the background that I've lodged this tribunal case claim, so I don't want to get too much into it. But the backlash, what I perceived to be a backlash against the film, was not just about the film. It was students acknowledging that they weren't happy with feedback, and they decided to kind of, don't want to say retaliate, but kind of, they were letting it be known that they weren't happy with my film. And that's kind of evidenced in the fact that many of the reviews aren't talking about the film. They're talking about teaching, or they're referencing teaching, and then trying to present their review as kind of objective and balanced. As far as I'm concerned, a review has nothing to do with teaching. So like the two things should have been completely separated. And the film that started this backlash, here we are almost a year later. I offered feedback to this film. They weren't happy. They've made that clear on Letterboxd. Like, they acknowledge this, that they're not happy with feedback, and they then write these negative reviews. Other people get involved and the whole thing explodes. And obviously that poo review is a reminder that there's still kind of remnants of this backlash that are going on in the background. And it's really just quite wild that this happened. And it goes as far as, I was given screenshots of student group chats in which students were discussing the fact that they were targeting the film. I have those screenshots in which they're saying that they're kind of rallying together to do this. And one of them even says, make the review, I don't quote me verbatim, do like another review and make it look like it's about the film. Now, I mean, come on. These people want to go on, presumably, to make films and have a career in filmmaking. They've now left this digital footprint of their actions towards a filmmaker who makes micro-budget independent films. Now, they might say, and I guess this is their response, we were doing what you were doing. No. If I gave feedback in which I suggested something needed to be improved, that was done within the privacy and confines of a classroom environment. It was not public. My film was public. Now, by doing that, you've damaged the perception of the film to the rest of the world, because Letterboxd is a platform with millions and millions of subscribers and users. And as an indie filmmaker, like, I don't expect everyone to like my work. I think the point of indie filmmaking is that you are doing something maybe a little bit more out of the box, something that you might not necessarily see, for better or worse. Um, but you're hoping that someone comes across your work, as I've discussed previously, finds your work on one of these streaming platforms, has a quick look at some of the reviews, thinks, oh, that sounds interesting, or they didn't like it, but based on what they're saying, I might like it. And you're hoping for that, so that then they click play and it finds an audience. I realised the audience is going to be very niche, very small for my work. But the kind of the amount of half-star and one-star reviews was just kind of astounding. Like, and what was kind of surprising about the review, I often think about this quote from Malcolm Gladwell. Now, Malcolm Gladwell's an author, and he wrote the book Outliers. I think I mentioned it previously, and which popularized this idea of the 10,000 hours of practice that it takes to become a kind of master at something. And keep in mind, none of these students have done anywhere close to 10,000 hours worth of filmmaking. Nowhere near. And I guess this is the nature of the internet, isn't it? That even if you have limited experience, you deem your opinion worthy of sharing with the rest of the world. But here's what Malcolm Gladwell says about criticism. One of the things that drives me crazy, and he talks about book reviews, but let's call it films. So about bad book reviewers is that the question they're trying to answer when they write their review is as if they were writing the book, how would they have written it? And if the way the author wrote it deviates from the way the reviewer would have done it, him or herself, the reviewer gives the book a bad review. That's being a bad reader. The good reader is the one who says, sorry, I've got this up on my phone, so you'll have to bear with me. So the good reviewer is the one who says, what did the author intend when he or she wrote this book? And if you feel like they lived up to their intention, his or her intention, then the book is a success. Now, discovering someone's intention is not easy. It requires attention, work, and thought. Now, I'll get into some of the comments that were left later and some of kind of my responses to that, because I don't think on many occasions many of these reviewers were being authentic in terms of seeking to understand what it was I was trying to do. But anyway, that's by the by. One critic who was a student filmmaker wrote, "This feels like the Emperor's New Clothes, except everyone is beating the shit out of him." What is that? Like, what? Now, this filmmaker later deleted the review, but and I think they did this because they were due to release their own feature film that they'd made. Like, okay, hats off for making a feature film, but why would you write such a thing about other independent filmmakers when you're going to release your own independent film? And as it happens, this filmmaker's had a little bit of karma, because their film has now had a lot of negative reviews, and because they've operated in a popular genre and they've tried to do a genre film, it's obviously finding a lot of these genre audiences, and as a result, it's receiving a lot of negative feedback on Letterboxd. So, I mean, there we go. Like, my film is maybe, I don't operate inside genres. I don't kind of start with a genre as some people do, like, oh, I'm going to make a horror, I'm going to make an action film. I don't do that. So my film's kind of not reached these genre audiences, but this person's film has, and obviously it's blown up in their face. So thanks for deleting the review of my film, but I still have the screenshots, and it's disappointing that, like, a young filmmaker, someone starting out on the career, would do that and burn bridges. But there we go. And this brings me to kind of a bigger debate around film and education in general, because at the minute there's lots of talk in the news about the fees, student loans, compensation for COVID classes. Having worked in education, like, like if you missed classes during COVID, yeah, you're absolutely due compensation. Having worked in education, though, I know that attendance is often quite poor, so whether or not these people would have attended is a different question entirely. But if they didn't get given the classes, they definitely deserve compensation. But from my experience, disengagement was rising. A sense of entitlement was rising, a sense that I deserve kind of the grade that I think I should be given was rising. Um, Generally, is our subjects like film, and I don't want to get into the whole Mickey Mouse courses thing, but like, is film attracting less engaged students? I don't know. I know that there's a lot of people taking subjects like filmmaking, and I often find myself thinking, is this really what you want to do with your life? Because it's a huge like burden that you take on in terms of taking on that loan at 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. A loan you're going to be paying back for a long time. And sometimes I look at the people and think, you don't have the passion necessary to be a filmmaker. And like, we talk a lot about passion. Unfortunately, it does require passion. It does require early mornings. It does require hard work, physical labour. It's not easy. There's a lot of disappointments. And even after you've finished the film, you've spent 3 years of your life working on something, you might then meet a bunch of students who decide that I'm not accusing anyone of anything, but we don't like this film and we're going to leave a lot of negative reviews. So the kind of disappointment is never ending in many ways. But this kind of sense of entitlement is quite interesting, because I do think because of the amount of money, there is a sense of we're paying, we deserve something. But that isn't education, is it? Like, education is something that's ongoing. It's trial, it's failure, it's recorrecting your mistakes, it's showing humility, it's about critical thinking, it's about expanding knowledge and understanding, hopefully leading towards some sort of expertise. It's not it's not it's not about it's not customer service. It's not, I'm going in a shop to buy a jacket. If you went in the shop to buy a jacket, like, you're not expecting the person behind the desk to say, well, that jacket doesn't match them pants. If I were you, I'd try and change that. Like, yes, okay, that's a bit of a shoddy analogy, but you're going to, in education, meet people who challenge your views of what good is, or what technical standards look like, or what storytelling is. You're going to come across those tutors, hopefully, that are going to challenge you. But increasingly, kind of, and I'm going to tread on eggshells a bit here again, because as I say, I've got kind of something going on in the background with my previous employer, but I don't want to say the year, but I was supervising this final film group, so this is what they're building up to now. At university, I did a dissertation. I did film and media studies. I later did a master's in fiction film production, but my BA, my undergraduate degree, was in film and media studies, and I had to write, I think it was 12,000 word dissertation. I forget the word count, on my own. Like, so that's a lot of work. Meanwhile, on film courses, you have people teaming up in teams of 7, crewing up in groups of 7 or 8 or 9, and some people are doing next to nothing. I was supervising a group a couple of years ago, and we're 2 days out from shooting, and the production designer has no idea what the actors are going to be wearing in 2 days' time. How is that equal to a written dissertation? I don't think it is, quite frankly. Thankfully, this person, once we had a chat with them, they really kind of got their act together, and they realised, okay, this is serious. I need to get these things in place so that we know what the actors are going to wear. But that's kind of a minimum, isn't it? Like, if I'm going into a film, I've got folders worth of material in which, okay, they're wearing this. On Tuesday, they need to have this costume ready. But anyway, and then there was another group, and I remember thinking, when they were talking about the film, it felt like a funeral parlour. I felt like I was sat in a funeral parlour. Someone had died, and we were all just discussing how sad it was. And yet we weren't discussing that. We were discussing the film that they were about to make. The lack of enthusiasm kind of blew my mind. I actually wondered, are we making a film here? Like, because to me, even though you're going through that process of undertaking a very difficult task as a filmmaker, that you're going to try and go out, acquire this footage. Once we have the footage, we then need to get it into the edit, and we might need to rethink our initial plans. All those challenges that you come up against, there's always enthusiasm for what I'm about to do because I love it. And that's kind of the passion that it takes. So when I see a lack of enthusiasm, I'm like, okay, I don't know the specific circumstances. Maybe there's something going on in their private lives. Maybe there's arguments that I don't know about that are going on behind the scenes and they've fallen out. I don't know. But when a group of 7 or 8 all look really kind of downtrodden, I'm wondering, is filmmaking the right thing for you? And I would always say to anyone who wants to become a filmmaker, if those challenges that you're about to face don't excite you, it really isn't for you, because it's too fucking hard to make a film. It really is. It's one of the hardest things I can imagine. Frankly, writing a dissertation is way easier. Sitting at a computer on your own and writing an essay on one of your favourite filmmakers or one of your favourite films, way easier than going out into the field, making a film, and getting over those hurdles that life inevitably throws at you. And as an indie filmmaker, you don't have the time and money to make things work in the way that you would like. For example, if you look at like one of Christopher Nolan's films, for instance, he will have huge sheets placed between buildings to block out the light and then light the scene perfectly. You don't have that as an indie filmmaker. You might be going into a space, you've got no control of who walks into shot. And I've actually had this. I was shooting a sequence outside a bar in Manchester once, and someone just deliberately like walked into me in the lens and then just walked off laughing. Now they were pissed, obviously, they were drunk, but they walked right into me, tried to knock the camera out my hand. And that's kind of what you're facing on occasions. Like the world doesn't stop. And I'll talk to you about another indie film I worked on, actually, because not today, on a episode in the future, because I actually ended up working with a filmmaker who expected the world to stop, and that was quite challenging, because it's like, no, you can't make this city come to a standstill for your film. You do not have the budget. So I've kind of gone on a bit of a tangent there, and as I say, I've got notes on the screen because I'm treading very carefully around how I talk about what's happened within education as a filmmaker and as a film lecturer. But there was another project, and I know like last week we talked about film projects, but I think it's quite interesting that using these examples, because you can get to the root of how to navigate indie filmmaking if we look at what not to do. Now, I was teaching this group and I saw a video earlier this week on Instagram, and it was a filmmaker talking about, he says, we all know that the student filmmakers who become gearheads, they think by having the best camera, the best lens, it's going to be something to use as something that will get them through a production, or something to hide behind, something that they can rely on and go, well, we shot on this, we used this lens, we had this camera. I don't think so. And there was a group a few years ago, they had all this expensive equipment and they left it in a vehicle overnight, and the equipment was stolen. Now that is just shocking as far as I'm concerned, just to leave equipment. Like, I would never do that. And you know why? Because my equipment is my own. If I leave it in the car and it gets stolen, I'm the one who's losing out. But I think sometimes, like when you're learning and you're in education, you think, not my problem. But think, as I said last week, you've got to think about the wider filmmaking community. If equipment's stolen, that does impact other people. And too often I met film students who didn't think about how their work was impacting the work of others. An easy example around this is I speak to so many actors, and they simply refuse to do student productions because how they've been treated. My partner Miranda will not do student films anymore. She worked on a film for a university in Manchester. This is years ago now, but they were all sat around. They said, so what we doing? Like, she sat there, they've not offered her a drink, they've offered her no hint that they're going to give her a biscuit even, and they're just sat around saying, what are we doing? That just isn't good enough. So you do have to think about how your work is going to impact the wider filmmaking community. And it's like when an actor like Seth Summers, who I worked with on Notion, he put out an Instagram post about the experience of working on Notion, saying it reminded him exactly why he got into this, because the experience was so pure, so full of passion. And this isn't me saying I'm great. It's me saying I've learned from mistakes that I've made over the years, so that hopefully now everyone involved does have a good time. Now, some people have claimed that they didn't have a good time, and I might get into that in a later episode, because actually that was just absolute fabrication from that person. And again, that person tried to get involved in this reviewing of Blurred Lines. Incidentally, that person was a student. So I'll discuss that at a later date. So I'm going a bit round the houses, but Seth's like an actor who's worked on, I think he's recently been in a Disney Plus show. He was in Casualty, and for him to say like this indie film was a clear reminder that he's doing the right thing, that's great. That's exactly what we want. But as I said about gear, the equipment does not save your film. Like, if you want evidence that gear has nothing to do with the quality of a film, go and watch a film called Feston, which is Dogma film number 1 by Thomas Vinterberg, shot on a Handycam, one of the most powerful stories you'll ever see. Universal, timeless themes about family dynamics, absolutely incredible. And shot on kind of an old Handycam, what we would deem old now, but new at the time. Tape, mini DV, absolutely incredible. And it wouldn't matter whether that was shot on an Arri or the Handycam, the story was there. And when I was thinking about this film that lost all the equipment, I don't think the story was there. But equally, they've gone on to lose a load of expensive equipment. Now, what's surprising about this, and this is where I'm wondering, like, if you give those people a degree, what are you actually teaching them? And what's surprising about this is some of these students then went on to get master's degrees, having had lost expensive equipment on their final film. And this is where, like, sometimes I wonder about university and how you teach filmmaking, because if Werner Herzog was teaching those students, he'd have a lot to say about that. He really would. And like, and Werner Herzog for me is the filmmaker I always look to as an indie filmmaker, because he's someone who has made films independently, consistently got them financed, consistently fought against the elements to make sure he gets his work out into the world. For those who don't know, Werner Herzog is a filmmaker. He made things like Fitzcarraldo, he made things like Aguirre, The Wrath of God, he made Nosferatu in the late 70s. His is the better remake, for those who are wondering, as far as I'm concerned. And he's made some absolutely incredible documentaries. He made a documentary called Grizzly Man. He made a Land of Silence and Darkness, which is one of the most moving documentaries you'll ever see. So yeah, just an incredible filmmaker. He would have something to say about filmmakers that lost equipment and then achieved a master's degree. Like, I'm not criticizing, but this is where, like, there's kind of an interesting discussion that needs to be had about teaching some of these subjects, because the consistent argument is that I see on all the time on social media, university is not worth it. But I think that's because we're tying the worth of a degree to whether it gains you employment in that industry. For me, studying filmmaking has nothing to do with whether I ever get money from it. Like, university should be about, as I said previously, critical thinking, expanding your knowledge, trying to develop your expertise, or moving towards expertise within that area. It's really quite sad to me that university's been turned into this thing of thinking, okay, if you get employment, it's successful. It's like, no, how do we measure success? Like, is that success whether you go on to work 12-hour days on Hollyoaks? I don't think it is, quite frankly. I think that's really quite sad. Like, I don't think anyone, or as far as I'm concerned, I'd be shocked if anyone fell in love with cinema and then decided to study it, pursue it, and then happy to become a runner on Hollyoaks. Now, nothing against Hollyoaks, it could be any of those shows, but to me it's about, like, developing in that area and then continuing to do it regardless of money. Like, I will make films regardless of whether or not I make any money from them. Like, in fact, I'll get onto it later, but if anything, I'm losing money to put my work out into the world. But I've seen a lot of change, and this isn't old man shouts at cloud, as some people might like to refer to it as. But when I think back to my experiences on when I was doing a master's degree, our supervisor, um, he wasn't happy with the way our director was conducting himself. And in a group meeting with us, which the director missed, the supervisor said he needs a rocket up his arse. Now, I know some people might hear that and think he shouldn't have been saying that. And no, he probably shouldn't have said it in that way. He should have probably articulated it in a different way. But we got what he was saying. He was saying that the director is not pulling this production in the way it should be going quickly enough. And this is a person who'd written written TV shows. He'd done all sorts of things. He'd had quite a successful career. I knew that I should probably listen to him, because if he's saying that, even if he's not saying it in the most articulate way, he's saying that for a reason. He's saying that based on his experience. That final film that we went on to make at the screening, so we had like kind of an end of year screening where we got some feedback from our tutors and we got to play it for the rest of the class. The head of the course at the time said that ending's a cop out, and he said this in front of everyone. So this was completely public. We didn't complain. I wanted to know, okay, what about this ending does he think is a cop out? Now, for some context, I wasn't a director at university. I specialised in editing and sound. Why? Because I knew that regardless of a filmmaking course, I would want to direct and make films at some point, but I decided that I'd probably be best served getting some knowledge and understanding in other technical areas and other creative areas. Sound is so important in film. I spend so long just kind of working on sound design, playing with the sounds to really immerse an audience in the film. And as far as I'm concerned, editing is the thing within filmmaking. It's the technical detail that is unique to cinema. So we have cinematography, which comes out of photography. We have sound, which comes out of radio and other things. We have drama, which comes out of theatre, and we have obviously novels and things like that. But editing is unique to cinema. That idea that you can put two images together and you can completely transform a film's meaning or its reading. So editing is something I spend loads of time thinking about. And even recently I pulled out a couple of shots and changed them for other shots in one particular sequence, because it's like, okay, maybe that point has been made and right now I need to suggest something else and leave the audience a little bit of space to reflect on that. So yeah, I was the editor and sound person on these films, but our tutor said that the film was the ending and the film was a cop-out. Why was he saying that? What can I learn from that if he's saying that? And he did go on to explain why he thought it was a cop-out, because we tried to be clever and think that cutting to black on this particular sequence was kind of edgy and it would shock the audience. I understand what he was getting at. He said it's more, he prefers, and this is, again, we're getting to subjectivity of what is engaging in cinema. He thought it would be better for us to see the reaction of the other person in the shot rather than cutting to black, because then we would be left with something really to think about. Okay, from here, where do we go? Because we've seen how this other person viewed this action. Now, what it was is a dad turns his gun on a little girl. As he turns the gun, what we did was cut to black. And again, it's because we were copying the tropes, filmmaking tropes that we'd seen other people do. Whereas he thought, well, if we cut to the mother and we see the mother's heartache at what's happened, that would really give the audience something to think about. So yeah, I guess there's no right or wrong, but we were definitely thinking way more generically about filmmaking and endings, and our tutor called us out on it, but we didn't complain. I tried to understand his reasoning. Now, this was a filmmaker who I wasn't a huge fan of their work, I'll be honest. Like, I wasn't a huge fan of the way their style of filmmaking. It was kind of way different to how I would make films. But I absolutely respected that person's authority, because they had made films. They had gone out there. They'd made independent films, and they'd done it in an era where, so this person went to film school in like the 80s, and then he's teaching us in kind of 2006, 7. He'd done this in a period of celluloid. He'd managed to continue making films through celluloid, early digital filmmaking, when most people kind of fell off the face of the earth in terms of the people he studied filmmaking with. I remember him saying on the very first lecture we had with him, after 25 years, I'm still the only person making film. I'm the only person still making films out of my film class. And I remember looking at him thinking, that's going to be me. Like, that's what I want. I don't care how I do it. I'm going to be that person. And here we are. So what would that be? 2006, and we're now, I guess we're 20 years in September since that comment was made. So I think 5 more years. I think I can hang in there. Touch wood. Hopefully nothing happens to me between now and then. I've nearly achieved it, and it's been hard work, no doubt about it. But in terms of respecting that person as a filmmaker, like, I knew I could learn things from them, and it was about me showing humility. So even though I didn't necessarily like their filmmaking, the films that they put out, like, it wasn't my style, it wasn't the kind of thing I'd do, I respected the fact that they had done it, and therefore I can learn from them. Now, this isn't to say that everyone on the course was different than to students now, and people didn't reject advice. I remember sitting in an editing feedback session with this tutor. So I was the editor, and the director was meant to be there. The director didn't attend. This is a different director than the one who needed a rocket up his ass. This other director couldn't attend, so I went to the session, and the tutor started talking about looking at the film in a different way. And he gave me a list of possible restructure that we could have undertaken. Now, I got a call from the director, and I was really excited about trying out these changes. The director said, I don't think we can do that. I don't think we should do that. And we left it as it was. Now, for me, like, I always think it's worth trying something, because even if you then go, you know what, doesn't work, let's just throw that out the window. You tried it, you explored it. So yeah, this isn't to say that everyone back then was open to filmmaker advice, but I found as a filmmaker that if there's someone offering genuine advice, then maybe you should listen to it. Like, even with Notion, I screened it for the 2 actors, an early version, Caitlin and Seth, and they had some points, and I re-looked at scenes as a result, and I have made some of those changes. I asked Miranda her opinions about the film all the time, like, do you think this works? Do you think, what do you think about this? And we'll have real kind of deep conversations in which we explore the implication of every cut or every sound for the audience. Okay, if we do this, what is the implication of that? And I think that's about humility and understanding that there's still so much to learn. Filmmaking is not something that you complete. You don't complete it. Like, it's an ongoing process. And I'm going to pull up this quote that Martin Scorsese said. Akira Kurosawa, who's a filmmaker who made things like Seven Samurai, he's made loads of incredible films, Throne of Blood, Rashomon, just loads and loads of films. Go and check out his work. When he received, I believe it was when he received an Oscar, he said, and this is a quote from Scorsese, "I'm only now beginning to see the possibility of what cinema could be, and it's too late." So he was 83, and at the time Scorsese says, what does he mean? Now I know what he means. And now Scorsese's reached a similar age. He understands what that filmmaker was getting at. There's always something more to learn. There's always something more to understand about the art form. Coppola, who directed The Godfather, he always talks about the fact that cinema's so young, and it kind of drives me crazy when people teach filmmaking and they say, oh, you write a script like this. Or if students have kind of learned a structure for something, they say, oh, you can't not do that. It's like, you can do anything. You can do anything. And you should be thinking about, okay, what is the risk? Am I taking creative risks? The famous Coppola quote is, I'll read it to you. An essential element of any art is risk. If you don't take a risk, then how are you going to make something really beautiful that hasn't been seen before? I always like to say that cinema without risk is like having no sex and expecting to have a baby. You have to take a risk. You try to go to a producer today and you say you want to make a film that hasn't been made before, they'll throw you out because they want to see the same film, the one that works, the one that makes money. That tells me that although the cinema in the next 100 years is going to change a lot, it will slow down because they don't want you to take a risk anymore. They don't want you to take chances. And this comes from an article in which Coppola says he went home to his wife earlier in that week after a day in the edit and said, "Wow, I learned so much today." Now, if the person who back to back made The Godfather, The Conversation, The Godfather Part 2, and Apocalypse Now, after being a filmmaker for 45, 50 years, can say they learned so much, that says everything about what I need to be thinking in terms of how I approach film, how I approach filmmaking. I don't have all the answers. I can only talk about my experiences, and the things that I know. But to me, like a degree, a master's, it means nothing. I've learned so much more about filmmaking since completing those qualifications. So that's why kind of when what happened with Blurred Lines was really quite astounding, because some of the reviews, I would say, were really quite arrogant. There was one student in particular, and the way they signed off their review, it's like, who the fuck are you? I've watched what you've produced. Like, why are you publicly writing this stuff about someone who's gone out of their way to help you? It was really quite shocking, and it's like cinema's always going to have some sense of subjectivity, and it just has to, because we all respond different ways to films and to art. Like, not all of us like the same thing. Like, you only have to go into a record shop to realize there's so many different things that people like. But yeah, some of the reviews really, they weren't reviews as far as I'm concerned. Having said that, it's also been a good week for film reviews. Beyond Alex, there was, again, this is a film student, and it's available on Letterboxd, and they were kind of down the middle on the film. There was things they liked, there was things they didn't like in Blurred Lines. They gave it 3 stars, that's fine. I'm not here to convince people otherwise, but I really liked their review because they went out the way to, even the things they didn't like, say why they didn't like it. That's all you can ask for as a filmmaker, because here's the thing, right? Yesterday I received a £300 invoice for a studio that I've got booked for next week for the pickup shots. I'm now 20,000 plus invested in the budget for Notion. Indie films, micro budget films have no budget to compete with Hollywood marketing. Indie films are reliant on people being honest, giving honest criticism. Casual viewers might be scrolling through, they might see a review, and like this one, even though it's kind of down the middle on the film, they might say, "Oh, okay, there sounds like something interesting going on here. Let's click play." That's what you're after. That's what you're doing it for. You're chasing that one person, that 2-3 handful of people that your work is going to speak to, because that's all you can hope for as an indie filmmaker. So really, when this thing happened around Blurred Lines, it was really disappointing because as this critic actually says, Blurred Lines, this is a very personal film that's had some very unfortunate discourse around it. I couldn't agree more. There was one in particular where they wrote this endless amount of, it was like they'd written a dissertation on my film, and they went on and on and on, and each point had a caveat, except they couldn't spell caveat, so it just undermined the whole review, quite frankly, because if you're trying to sound like an intellectual, like, at least do a spell check before you post it. But this person went on and on and on and on and on. But some of the reviews, I get it. The film might not be for everyone, but they make the assumption that I've not done what I intended to do. Like, one of them's like, "Oh, keep going. You might make something that eventually works for an audience." It's like, why do you assume that I've not made the film that I wanted to make? A lot of the student reviews had a problem with the length. For me, time is the great manipulative factor in cinema. Like, it's the thing that you're moulding constantly. Look at that cut in 2001 where Kubrick goes from the apes learning to like fight with the bone, and then throws the other monkey bone up into the sky, and then we cut to a spaceship, and we realise how far mankind has come, from like primitive ape to people who can travel outreaches of the galaxy. It's like such an incredible cut, and Kubrick's someone who speaks about editing being the one thing that's kind of the unique technical and creative skill to cinema. So length, I'm always thinking about what can we do with time to make an audience really be in that subjective space of that character. So like, for instance, the review that was kind of down the middle of the road was saying things felt long. Much of Blurred Lines is a film in which a character has had a great disappointment, and they're now in that sort of post-depression disappointment where they're struggling to get out of that slump, that feeling of being in the sludge, stuck in the mud. When you feel like that, time almost expands. Like, and I'm someone who's actually suffered with anxiety and depression over the years, and I've been signed off work with both of them conditions, and I've really, and this isn't again for sympathy, but I'm someone at one point who was really in a deep depression for weeks. Like, I was literally being tended to at my bedside by my mum, like about 10-15 years ago, because I was in such a depression. I've never experienced time like that, where seconds seem to be hours. So in cinema, like, how can we do that? Can we linger on shots? Can we then, as a contrast, and cinema like storytelling for me works so well with contrast, because if you show someone in a problem and then you show the opposite to the problem, then we can use cinematic techniques that replicate that. So if we go from shots that linger, that really go on for too long, moments that sit for too long, and we're almost bored of them ourselves, and we start feeling where this character's at, and then when we see that they're picking themselves up, that there's a bit more hope, if we even speed up the cuts, the rhythm of the cuts, if we start moving from locked off camera work to perhaps more handheld, free documentary type filmmaking, the audience pick up on that and they feel it. And a great example of a filmmaking that uses contrast is Blue Valentine, which I discussed previously, in which we have two parallel stories, one set in the past where these two characters are falling in love. We have lots of handheld camera work. We have almost, they feel improvised, the scenes, because it has that sense of new love where we don't know what's going to happen. Compare that with the present, in which this couple's falling out of love. We have long drawn out takes, the camera's locked off, it's often on a long lens so that we're really tight in their faces because the characters are literally in their heads. That's the kind of things you can do creatively through camera work, but also through editing and how long we hold on a shot. So length is absolutely, the length of some of the scenes was absolutely something I was thinking about in the making of that film, like how we hold on their moments. And I was often telling Miranda when we were doing some of these scenes, no, hold longer. Contrast that with the ending, in which I essentially made a documentary. So the film moves from fiction, the kind of rigid nature of fiction, into essentially a documentary at the end, in which I was just capturing moments because this character's life has kind of come alive again. That was deliberate. Now, whether or not it works for every audience is a different thing entirely, but it goes back to what Malcolm Gladwell was saying, that you've got to try and, as a critic, and this is where I think Letterboxd has done a lot of damage to film criticism, YouTube too, because we don't have those critics like Roger Ebert, who back in the day helped you understand a film a little bit more through reading their reviews. Now it's all kind of, can I write the 1-2 word review that gets thousands of likes, and can I be edgy and comical in the way I present reviews? Something's been lost as far as I'm concerned. So I always do go out the way to read a selection of reviews before going to watch a film, and especially then I will revisit a review after. Okay, does my opinion align with the way this person's thinking about cinema? Another thing that was kind of, a lot of people tried to ridicule in the film. So there's a dream sequence in which Miranda, who plays this character called Martine, talks about her understanding of film editing. And everyone said in this dream, but it undermines her argument. One, dreams are illogical. Time doesn't operate in the same way within a dream. But two, I was hoping an audience would go back and view the rest of the film and go, oh, everything she said, the film itself is the thing that presents that. So basically, there's this in the 1920s, there was a Soviet filmmaker called Lev Kuleshov, and he did this experiment with filmmaking where he filmed 3 blank faces and he told them to just look at the camera. He then cut those blank faces with 3 different objects. So a bowl of soup, a child on a swing, a dead body in a morgue. He then showed those film clips to different audiences. The audiences read intention within the actor's face. So either pride when looking at the child, either hunger when looking at the bowl of soup, or sadness when looking at the dead body, despite the fact that the actors within those clips did not know what they were looking at. Now, this proves something really kind of important about cinema, and Scorsese talks about this a lot, that it's not just about one shot, what's in that shot, what's in the second shot, but the kind of the spark that happens by placing 2 shots together. What's the implication of that? Now, Blurred Lines, the whole film is an example of that. We have actors who never operated within the same physical space. They're on FaceTime calls much of the time. The conflict and the conversation only exists through cuts. Like, often Miranda was acting to herself. She had no one to act opposite with, and then her reactions have been placed within a specific order to create the idea of conflict that occurs. Now, this isn't to take anything away from those performances by Miranda or David or Heather, but much of their acting and the conflict that arises from them conversations only happens through careful juxtaposition. That is what the film is talking about. There's another shot of Ricky, and we do a little bit of a visual gag because Ricky is played by David Barden. He talks about how he's been in many films and he understands a lot about filmmaking, and he's been in many, many films. And then I cut to this, not a very subtle gag, but a piece of dog shit on the side of the road that Miranda has to step over. The implication being that, like, the film's making a visual gag about maybe Ricky's films weren't that good. That cut, that idea only exists because of cutting. Within the dream sequence, there's a shot in which Miranda's kind of staring off into the distance. We have a brief flash of Ricky looking down the lens, and then Miranda says, "You know what? I should have said to Ricky." The editing is suggesting that Miranda is thinking about Ricky. Was Miranda thinking about Ricky? I don't know, possibly. But constantly throughout the film, I wanted the film itself to be an example of film performance isn't theatre. Film performance is built through shots, cuts, sounds. All these things are informing a cinematic performance. And there's a great interview with Frances McDormand in which she says, film is an editor's medium. I want to work with the filmmaker who understands that inserting a breath will enhance my performance. That is what that sequence was getting at. Now, whether or not you think whether or not you agree with that, like, okay, fine. Like, you disagree, that's okay. But the film itself was, for me, the kind of textbook example of what Kuleshov was getting at. That cinema is built. It's kind of building blocks, that shots plus shot plus shot equals meaning. You have multiple shots, multiple sequences, you have a film. Another thing that kind of was really strange is that a lot of reviewers thought that David's performance and Heather's performance were comical. Yes, but they're filtered through Martine's memory. Every single interaction bar one, I believe it's one. No, let me remember my own film. Much of the time, basically, Martine is recalling her interactions with these actors. Now, memory isn't accurate. This is one of the things that drove me mad about... Well, not drove me mad, but when people say Once Upon a Time in Hollywood shouldn't have depicted Bruce Lee in that way, it's like, no, but it's filtered through Cliff's memory of that event. It's not the actual event. It's the same with The Irishman when people go, oh, it looked phony. Yeah, but it's a man who's kind of at the end of his life recalling these events, so it has more leeway as far as I'm concerned. And this is what it's like when you're approaching cinema, you have to think, okay, what is actually happening here? If these actors are comical, is that Martine's opinion of these people? Yes. If the actions are comical, why doesn't she stand up to them? Well, that then says something about Martine, doesn't it? That she's someone who struggles with confrontation. Well, why is that? So I've definitely been someone who's tried to think through what it is I'm doing. So for like student filmmakers, frankly, to say, oh, you failed, like, no, whether or not you like it is a different matter entirely. But to say I failed at what I actually wanted to present, like, it's just not the case. Like, every single element of that film, I could talk you through, okay, why we did that. Until we get to the final sequence, which does become like a documentary. Throughout the film, Martine's a character who's been trying to seek control of her actors, of the way the film is being made, her expectations, until finally the film itself rids itself of that rigid nature and becomes almost like a documentary. And again, this is where, like, some of the criticism, it really tells me a lot about the type of work that some student filmmakers are engaging with, because one person said, after all of that, the final showdown isn't with the actors. It's like, come on. It's like, is that how life works? I don't think it is. It's like, I've not seen any of these students who attacked my film since all that kicked off. Life goes on. Sometimes you don't have the clean confrontation that you might have in a film. And one of the things I loved about this review by this I think they're still student as far as I know. They wrote, overall, I think it's a real shame that this is the version of the film we ended up seeing. There are such powerful moments that are surrounded by chaos. I hope the original version, before all the chaos of blurred lines, finds its way onto a film set. Now, intentional or not, that comment, there are such powerful moments that are surrounded by chaos, I absolutely love that sentence. That speaks to everything I've always tried to do with filmmaking. Presenting life as it appears to me, that you've got to look for the beauty amongst the kind of madness and disappointment that life sometimes offers us. And I think Blurred Lines does that. We have a character that has to sit in a lot of upset and disappointment for a long time, but then eventually they do find the moments of beauty. And we feel that because we've sat in the chaos for so long. So I absolutely adore that sentence. It's that powerful moments surrounded by chaos. That's what I did with my first feature X. Now, whether or not that appeals, that's by the by. But it's definitely something that I'm mindful of, presenting life as it is, that things aren't clean, that things aren't easy to wrap up in a traditional 3-act structure. And in terms of seeing the film that was originally meant to be made, yes, that film is called Notion. Now, I'll talk about what happened at a later date, but if you've seen Blurred Lines, you probably have some understanding of what actually happened. There was some issues with actors. I couldn't go forward with the project. The very next year, we went and shot Notion, but I wasn't going to let my summer holiday be kind of ruined. I'd planned to make a film, so I went out and I made Blurred Lines. Now, it might not be perfect, but as a filmmaker, you've got to be prepared to maybe publicly fail, to publicly fall on your face. As I say, like, it's a film that I haven't seen anything like before, and to me, that's got to count for something. Like, one thing I'm sick of is going to the cinema and within 5 minutes I know exactly what the final shot of that film is going to be. I know exactly what's going to happen. And in terms of what I've been viewing this week, I'll give you an example of that. I watched a few things actually. I watched a film called Sorry Baby, which is worth checking out. I revisited Peeping Tom. Now, I've not seen that I don't think I've seen that since I was a film and media student, so maybe 20 odd years ago. So I revisited that, but then I watched this film called Colours with Robert Duvall. This is because of obviously his passing recently, and Sean Penn, and this is a kind of cop drama. What a strange film. Real cliched stuff. Like, we've got a cop on the eve of retirement, close to retirement. Within 10 minutes, I was like, well, right, here's where the spoilers come in. So if you're tired of the podcast now, you can check out. I was like, well, I think he's going to be in danger by the end of this film. And then we've got the young cop, Sean Penn, trying to prove his worth in all the wrong ways. and just tonally it was all over the place. It's trying to be gritty, but the score felt like it was Beverly Hills Cop. Just really bizarre. And after a TV show like The Wire, in which we have like a real kind of authentic, well, as close to authentic take on that kind of the institutional problems with the police force, with politicians, the issues like on the streets with drug dealers and addicts. To see a film like Colours, which tries to do this in a real short space of time, it just felt really naive and, yeah, comical. And that's why when people talk about worth being attached to working in the industry, chances are that sometimes you might be working on stuff that is going to look pretty bad within like a 20-30 year time frame. So don't put stock in whether or not you're working in the industry. Put stock in the fact that, okay, I'm working on something I really believe in. Now, for all I know, maybe the filmmakers did believe in this project, but it certainly hasn't aged very well. In fact, like I've seen a lot of reviews, and I thought exactly the same way. It's aged like milk, quite frankly. Yeah, really strange, but worth checking out just to see how these over time our perception of certain stories changes and our expectations of certain stories changes. So yeah, Colours, interesting. So yeah, I think obviously I've talked about a lot here, and as it's gone on, I've hopefully been a bit more freer in how I've spoken about some of these things. What I'd say is, like, if you are posting reviews and you are thinking about reviewing films, like, just consider the people that are behind those reviews. Once the film's been made public, obviously behind closed doors, if you're offering feedback, fine. But when you're dealing with micro-budget indie filmmaking, you really need every little bit of help you can get. Like, I'm 20,000 in the hole for my next feature. I really hope that these reviews don't start again when I finish that feature film. Hopefully not. Hopefully those people will have moved on to other pastimes by the time that film's finished. But yeah, like, indie filmmakers are not working with Hollywood budgets, and we need those reviews, whether or not they're good or bad, but fair. The criticism is fair, that it's not kind of informed by some other thing that's going on in the background, like classroom feedback. So that is this week's podcast. Thank you. Hopefully this has been of use, and I'll see you next week.